Okay. We're live. Baruch Hashem. Good. So we're going to jump in. We're in Os Tzadik. So I want to start off from two psukim in Mishlei. This is in Perek Yud of Shlomo HaMelech's metaphors. Perek Yud Pasuk Chaf Daled. Meguras Rasha Hitavoenu. The fear of the wicked will come upon him. Will come up, right. Betavas tzadikim yitain. And the yearning, or the desire, that's a better translation, of the righteous, he will give. He referring to God. Next pasuk, pasuk chafei. Ka'avor sufa ve'ein rasha. As the storm subsides, there is no more wicked. Meaning the wicked have been swept away by the storm. V'tzadik yesod olam. And the tzaddik is the foundation of all the earth. These two psukim are describing the dynamic of tzaddik versus Rasha. There's many psukim like this. David HaMelech was the first one to really write in this manner, to list psukim in Sefer Tehillim that are doing a compare and contrast of the orientation of being of the tzaddik versus the orientation of being of the Rasha, and how they compare and contrast. And the very first chapter in Tehillim, right, we say Ashrei Tamimei Derech, that how fortunate are the ones who walk in the path of simplicity and impurity. Right? And it compares all of the ways in which a tzaddik conducts themselves and a Rasha conducts themselves. Right, that the tzaddik will be as a tree that is planted on flowing waters, below Kena Rishayim, but the Rishayim will not. They will not be in a state of serenity. Right, a tzaddik achieves a state of serenity and flow, and the Rasha does not attain this. This is David HaMelech's model, and his son Shlomo in Mishlei takes this model, and that's basic. That's a very, very dominant model. So obviously, there's many things to say of comparing and contrasting tzaddikim to Rishayim. It's not just one, or 2 points that you can make. But this is pointing out something that is very, very unique. It's saying, how is it that Rishayim and tzaddikim relate to receiving abundance and the whole dynamic of sustainability in the world, sustainability in turn as it relates to being. So the fear of the wicked will come to him, but the desire of the righteous will come to him, will be given to him. So what does this mean? Let's unpack this, right? As the Maharal says in his Chidushei Agados to Baba Metzia Daf Lamed Aleph, the Maharal says very, very powerfully, he says, Hapachad mehadavar, that the fear of something, oseh ha'adam chasuf la'oso davar, that the fear of something makes someone susceptible to that thing. The fear of the thing brings upon susceptibility of that thing. We all understand this psychologically. The Maharal in many places in his Ksavim, in Derech Chaim, in Perek Gimel, in his Chidushei Agados and Makos, and also over here he alludes to it in the Chidushei Agados and Baba Metzia. He gives this example. He says, if you're walking on the floor, you can walk in a perfectly straight line with no problem. You can put one foot in front of the other, and that's perfectly fine. You could do it, right? If you don't have any, big motor coordination issues, you could do that, no problem. But if you're walking across a bridge on a tightrope, you suddenly have you suddenly find yourself lost in being able to walk in a straight line. Why is that? Because the fear affects your ability to function. It affects your ability to function, right? He develops this theme a lot in this idea of how the schalim, right, the intellectual domain, the spirit of the intellect flowing through the chomer, flowing through the material substrate, is influenced, and the interaction between those two things. That's a broader topic in and of itself. But just to hone in on this specific theme, the idea that fear makes someone susceptible to something. So the Rasha, he is in a state of fear. I think we quoted this pasuk in a different conversation, maybe on Shabbat. We were talking about this. The pasuk, which is also the Gemara in Gittin, quotes this pasuk when discussing the collapse of the Jewish people in the time of the Chorban Bayis Sheni. It says, "Ashrei Adam mefached tamid." that it is proper for someone to be in a constant state of fear. Person is how fortunate it is for someone to be in a state of fear. So retorts the Gemara, how can that possibly be? We have an opposite verse that says, excuse me, it's on the tip of my tongue. Chataim. Mefached chataim b'tzion. That's not the exact language, but that's a close enough. That's a close enough paraphrase. That the sinners of Zion are afraid constantly, all the time. So fear is actually a symptom of being in a not positive state of being. So the Gemara makes the distinction. He says, yes, that's true. Really, being in a state of fear is not a good sign. It's not a good sign. What is the fear that is praiseworthy? Right? Tainu b'divrei Torah. That's relating to matters of Torah. Meaning, when a person has a certain approach to his spiritual refinement, that he's concerned that he's going to lose his spiritual level, that's a good fear to have. It's kind of like a good parallel to that is when you're doing something that requires focus, and the consequences of not being focused is that you can cause danger to yourself. Like driving, for example, you want to be a little bit on edge. If you're completely chilled out, and you have the same state of mind as if you're lying on your couch watching a movie, that's a bad thing. You should be a little bit on edge so that you'll be alert enough in order to function. So similarly, that type of fear relating to spiritual matters is a good thing. A person must be on guard, and that fear will not affect the person negatively. That fear is a good thing. As we see, that terminology is actually how Yitzchak Avinu related. That was the primary avenue in which he related to God. The Pachad Yitzchak, as Yaakov Avinu describes. Right, he said that God was the terror of my father Isaac. Usually, terror has a negative connotation, but in appropriate context, it's actually a very, very powerful thing. Again, that could be a whole separate conversation in itself. But again, bringing it all back in, we're touching on many, many big topics over here. I'm trying to keep it focused. The pachad of the Rasha, the terror of the Rasha makes him susceptible to everything that he is terrified from. However, the tzaddik, the things that he yearns for, it's the opposite. It's a yearning that brings positivity. This pasuk, to use the modern jargon, is a description of what has come to be known as the law of attraction. The Rasha, because he is oriented in a negative way, as we will see in a moment, the negative orientation is how he relates to amassing things. That's the next pasuk, but just to skip ahead a little bit to what we're going to see in the next pasuk. The Rasha sees amassing things as it's the yearning to gain security, or it's the yearning to give to self. It's the yearning to amass. It's the miserly attitude, or perhaps even a more destructive, like a malicious plan to get more resources in order to do bad things with, God forbid. But even if you're not planning to do bad things, you're just trying to amass wealth in order to have, in order to get, in order to obtain a certain type of security, perhaps. That's the perspective of the Rasha. So the Rasha is always in a state of fear that he's going to lose all of his stuff. And that fear makes a person susceptible to losing their stuff. However, the tzaddik, he has a completely different orientation to getting things. Completely different orientation. He does desire things. Ta'avat tzaddik, the desire of the tzaddik, the tava, which is usually, at least in the Torah, in Torah's Moshe, that word is always used in a negative connotation. The first time we see tava is relating to the Eitz Hadas. Ki tava hi la'inayim. Later on, when the Jewish people are in the Midbar, hisavu tava, they have this lust for meat, and they end up dying from the meat that they're given. Right, kivros hataiva, the graves of taiva, because they die there from that meat. So taiva is always used in the Torah. It's always used in negative connotation. Again, in David and Shlomo, they use that word in a positive connotation. Right? So David HaMelech in Tehillim Kuf Yotes, Ta'avti lishuascha Hashem, right? Or Hine Ta'avti libkudecha. I desire, I have a lust for your salvation. I have a lust for your Torah. So they switch the connotation of that word from a negative connotation to a positive connotation. So similarly, the tzaddik also has lusts. He also has desires. But because he's oriented, he has a completely different orientation towards getting and receiving. So the things come to him. They're given to him, yitain. So the Rasha, again, it's in stark contrast. The Rasha has all of his stuff and he's really afraid, and because he's afraid, he loses it. And the tzaddik is right now empty, and he has this desire, and because of that desire, things come to him. Yitain, right? Ta'ava tzaddik yitain. Next pasuk, which again sheds light on this pasuk, what this pasuk is talking about. Ka'avor sufa ve'ein rasha. When the storm comes, when there's a tumultuous time, when there's chaos in the world, that storm will sweep away the wicked. When the storm ends, the wicked guy is gone because he's been swept away. But tzaddik yesod olam. But the righteous man is the foundations of all the earth. Again, in complete opposite contrast. The Rasha, he's so weak, he can't even sustain himself. When the storm comes, he's swept away. But the tzaddik, not only is he not swept away himself, but he's the foundation of everyone else. He's the yesod of everyone else. He's the foundation. He's the anchor for everything. So the Rasha is so weak that he can't even keep himself grounded. But the tzaddik is so strong that not only can he keep himself grounded, but he keeps everyone else grounded. This is megaleh, so to speak. This gives a revelation as to what the first pasuk was talking about, as we said. Because the Rasha, he is so hyper-focused on self, on getting, on receiving, on amassing. So his foundation of self is very, very weak. And even his psychological orientation of the fear of losing out makes him susceptible to, in fact, losing, right? As it says, the Megurat Rasha Tivoenu, that the terror of the Rasha will befall him. That tzaddik has a completely different orientation towards receiving and getting, because he's the foundations of the earth. His attitude towards getting is that I need all this stuff in order to be able to serve, in order to be able to be the foundations. If I don't have tools, I can't be the foundation. If I don't have money, if I don't have time, if I don't have resources, then I can't be the foundation that I need to be. So the Rasha is completely baseless. He has no anger whatsoever because he's constantly in a state of anxiety and lack and terror and fear of losing out. And when the storm, the proverbial storm comes, he's swept away. But the tzaddik, who has this orientation in order to be a giver, in order to be a sustainer, so everything comes to him in a smooth, natural, organic manner, and he's able to be the foundations for the whole earth. Tzaddik yesod olam. He's the foundations of all the earth. This, I believe, is a very, very powerful introduction to the themes that Rav Kook talks about. Now, I just to give a caveat, that the text of Rav Kook here, I believe, is very generic, which is in contrast to almost all of the osios here. That there's a very, very targeted, specific message that emerges from the letters. Some of the letters, they seem to be very generic in the sense that they're building on themes that we already covered. And they're saying, oh, just like we talked about in this letter. So this letter pictorially, meaning structurally, how the letter actually looks physically, it's a combination of these letters. So this letter is a combination of those themes. Right? So we found that like once or twice in the progression. I believe this is another example where the actual text, just reading the lines that Rav Kook writes, you can possibly walk away with this more generic message. However, I think if we consciously try to, it's not necessarily reading between the lines, but it's just going the next step, taking the next step of what Rav Kook says and trying to perhaps extrapolate that a little bit more and gain a more specific theme. I think this really does organically emerge. This theme does organically emerge from the words themselves. So let's dive into that. So says Rav Kook, Nirdafu atzadik b'mivta'o hasamuch elakuf. The tzadi, the letter tzadi, because it flows into the letter kuf, meaning kuf is the next letter after the tzadi, so it's very often pronounced tzaddik. That's where the custom comes from. That Rav Kook, this is actually sheds light on this. I didn't know this. That very often you'll find the letter tzadi pronounced tzaddik in order to allude to the fact that tzadi kuf come right after each other. So that theme of the tzaddik, as we'll see, justice, the righteous man, is a theme baked into tzadi, and it's called that because tzadi kuf, right? There's a progression from tzadi to the kuf. Musag hatzedek, the idea of justice, bechlaliut ubepratiyut, in generality and in specificity, harehu mishtachlel bekibutz hatzvaim kulam, is attained through the gathering together of all the different shades and hues, colors. Ba'arichat kol hakochot kulam, in the orderly establishment of all the different forces. Al mechonam ve'al sidram, on their proper place and order. B'mkomam v'shiuram, and in their proper measurements. Hatzdadiut, you could take the word tzad, side, right? Right, it's not sad with an ayin, just sadi dalid, right? Sad, side, and you take that word and you make it into an adjective. So the sideness, stadiut, the sideness, harishum el hayachas shel kol noseh, is alluding to the idea of yachas, of relationalness, of relationship between all things. Why? The idea of tzad, this is standing on this side, is standing on this, meaning they're side to side. Even in idiom, we say side to side means things are in some type of relationship with each other. That's the other allusion of the name tzadi, the kav el ma shechutzlo, that which is outside of it. Hachafetz hapnimi shatzadim kulam shel kol musag, the inner yearning of the sideness, again, the relational component of every concept, shall kol mitzui v'haveh, of all things that are in existence, sheheim heim hanogim b'ha'olam hachitzoni, that they all touch upon the world that is external to them, meaning every single thing has to be in relationship with the things that are outside of it. Heim yihiyu yichusim meleim tzedek. Be yichusim, they will be relationships that are full of justice, meaning justice is ultimately about proper relationships between things. That's the definition of justice. Justice means the proper interaction between things. V'tzidkat Hashem tegaleh b'chol olamim u'b'chol tchunoteim, and the righteousness of God will be revealed in all the worlds and all of their attributes, like all the attributes within each world. Tenuoteim, their movements, v'hofaoteim, and their revelations. Milui zeh they manifest themselves in the justice of the individual. Ora yisodi shel tzadik yisod olam, the light of the foundation, which is the foundation of the righteous, is the foundation of the world. Tzadik yisod olam. Shehitavut ritzon maleh, that the manifestation of this will, yif'ezu binyan ha'olam kulo, is the ability for the whole world to be structured. Shichlulo v'tkumato, it's coming together, it's coalescing, and its continuity. Hachayim anakudatim, the individual points of life. Hamasufagim, that have been contained within. Ma'or hachayim, the light of life. Hashutfim haklalim im kol milchamoteim, with which the general flow of the dots of light. That's the language that is explicitly referring to Ot Nun. Ot Nun. Why is he giving a throwback to Ot Nun over here? Just look at the picture of the tzadi. What's the Ot Nun?
Nun's on the bottom.
Right. The most of the structure of the tzadi is basically a nun. It's a nun that's like a little bit folded over in order to make room for that other structure on the right hand side. Excuse me. The whole left side, is that what I said? The whole left side structure is a nun, and it's a little bit bent over in order to make room for the yud on the right. Yeah. So the flow of life, the flow of all the different points of life flowing through the sea of life, which is the language that was used in Ot Nun, Nun being the fish, the little dots of light swimming through the ocean of existence. Okay, Hashofim HaKlalim im kol milchamoteim, with all of their individual battles. V'netiyatam shel hamilchama v'koach hazayin el hayasod, which is revealing the power of the weapon, which is also contained in this attribute of Yesod, of foundation. So he's bringing in a lot of concepts from previous letters, as we said when we began this conversation. He's talking about how all the different structures of previous letters, not all, but many different concepts that were alluded to in the structures of previous letters are being manifest over here. First of all, you have the nun, because again, the whole left structure is basically a nun, and then in the nun itself, there's a zayin, because the top part of the nun is a zayin. Yeah, and Zion, as we said, klei milchama, are instruments of war. It's the primal impetus to fight for your survival. Not necessarily fight in a violent way, if necessary to fight in a violent way, but fight in the sense that you have to fight for your life. You have to fight in order to establish yourself, in order to gain sustenance, in order to be successful. So all the little wars of all the little dots of life flowing through the sea of life. Lo el hamitaba korban shifat haresha. This is not fighting in order to attain death and destruction, because that's the aspiration of the wicked. Yigalelenu atzadi betmunato. Rather, that tzadi is revealing to us in its image, meaning the actual structure of the letter. Tmunat nun. First of all, the picture of the nun, as we alluded to before a few lines earlier. Sfigat chayim, which is full of those little dots of life, the little dots of life swimming through the sea of being. Semel ha'afraya, which is also a sign of fertility. Right? We talked about that also in Ot Nun, that the fish, the nun in Aramaic is dag, fish. The fish embodies the theme of fertility. Like Yaakov blesses his grandchildren, v'yidgu larov, that you should multiply like fish, because fish have this, they embody this attribute of this endless fertility. And the revelation of vitality that emerges from this flow, this full flow, shel hitmazgut, kol hapratiut, of the coalescing and blending of all of the specific points of life, el haklaliyut ha'etana, of the full generality, the klaliut, all the pratim coming into the klali, all the specificities coming into the generality. That's the yesod. Mikolot ma'im rabim adirim mishbere yam adir mamaram Hashem. And all this alluded to in the pasuk in Tehillim Tzadi Daled, that the voices of the mighty waters, are an allusion to the might of God Himself high above. Meaning, these mighty waters, being itself is alluding to a flow of water. Being itself is like this massive ocean, and in the massive ocean is teeming with life. So you look at this seething ocean, and you can see like little dots of life. You see the shark over here, the dolphin over there, and the shrimps over there, and it's just full and teeming with life, and they're all flowing together in this organic ecosystem, all interacting with each other. That's like the mashal for all of being itself, and this finely tuned ecosystem, that's called yesod. The ability for them to be klulim, for them to all come together and be harmonized, that attribute is called yesod. Right? But as he's going to explain, it's not just harmony for the sake of harmony. We've talked about harmony in different contexts before, but it's harmony for a specific purpose. Harmony for the purpose of being able to be mashpia, in order to give out. Right? Any just to take a very mundane example, any skill that a person needs to learn. So they're learning there's the process of learning the skill, and that's a process in and of itself. But the end goal of learning that skill is in order to be able to do something with it, you're going to be able to help other people with it. A doctor who learns 1,000,001 little, let's say, it's not just pieces of information, but also micro movements, how to, use the scalpel, how to use that little hammer, that annoying little hammer that they new, right? All those things, okay, are fine-tuned and then blended together. And that's a process in and of itself. Harmony. We talked about the harmony in many different contexts, but all of that will eventually, to the day where he graduates medical school, he or her will graduate medical school and then go and use that to be mashpia, in order to give. So it's all of this harmony and unity being enabled by the desire to be mashpia, the desire, I want to be able to give in the end of this, right? I'm looking, 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, 10 years down the road. I'm doing all this in order to come out the other end a mashpia, a giver. That's the tzaddik yesod olam. That's the foundationness of the tzaddik.
So we're saying also in the fact that even just to work on oneself, you should not be thinking of, I'm working on myself because I want to be better. I'm working on myself because essentially I'm part of a whole, and I should be able to be giving.
Yes.
Further down the line.
Excellent. You have a perfect summation. And it's interesting because we've talked about, again, I'm going back to what I said already 3 times, but just to highlight, because you said it very well. We've talked about the idea of harmony many times throughout this whole progression, because again, this is all a flow back and forth between individuality and generality, and individuation and harmony. It's all a flow back and forth between these concepts. So we talked about harmony in many different contexts, but this is saying that in addition to the dynamics of harmony itself, meaning there's how harmony is achieved. That's a whole Torah in and of itself. How do you achieve harmony? Okay, that's one question. But zooming out, a bigger question is, okay, once I achieve this harmony, what is it for? Why do I need the harmony to begin with? So the answer to that question is, in order to be a tzaddik yesod olam. That's the answer to the question. What does that mean? Because in any form of hashpa'ah, any form of giving forth and being a giver, requires harmonizing certain attributes and certain skills and certain tchanim, certain certain content, as Rav Kook would put it, in order to be able to give, because there's no such thing as giving just one thing. It doesn't even make sense. It's not a coherent statement. Any form of productive giving is going to be accomplished by first bringing things together, right? I think a really good example, I don't know why I didn't give this example before, someone who builds an organization, a company, an NGO, a nonprofit. There's a lot of organization that goes into building that thing. A lot of bringing all the different people together, right? Excuse me. Bringing all the different people together, bringing all the moving parts together, doing all the paperwork. There's a lot of harmonization. But at the end of the day, you want to build that organization, not to have an organization, in order to do something with it. So now I built it. Now there's the foundation. Now I can do the thing. Now I can be a mashpia and a giver and be productive in the way that I want to be productive. Let's just finish the last couple of lines of the text over here. Hazayin nimshachu el hanun. So the zayin portion of the letter is connected to the nun. Mitakem hu uva el cheko, is bent over a little bit, right? A nun, like an actual nun, just a nun, is the vertical part of the nun is slightly more straight. On the tzadi, it's much more on an angle in order to accommodate the yud structure on the right-hand side. So what is this alluding to? The fact that it's mitakem, the fact that the nun part is more diagonal. V'habasis hama'asi hamidgalem b'fo'al u'b'tzira shel hatzedek is emerging into its form and into its actions in order to create the justice element. Again, justice being the proper relations between things. Hatzedakah v'hatzadik, charity and righteousness. Right? In Lashon HaKodesh, those two words are the same. They come from the same shoresh. Tzedakah is giving in order to address a need. That's tzedakah. We call it charity, which is fine. You can use that word. But a technical definition is tzedakah is giving in order to address a need that's not being filled. You see someone has a need, it's not being filled, you give tzedakah. That's tzedakah. All right? That tzaddik gives tzedakah. That's a tzaddik. Tzaddik is someone who gives tzedakah. That makes sense, right? The words even kind of allude to each other. B'chol tzadi tzadav. And that's the idea of the tzad, right? The sideness that we spoke about before. I am standing next to, on the side of everything else, and therefore I'm in perpetual relationship with everything else. And if I can be on the side, if I can be in relationship with everything, that makes me a tzaddik. B'chol yechusav v'kishurav, with all of his relationships and his connections. Holechu mitgadel, he progresses and grows. Mitarechu hama'amad hatachtiti, the lower base of the letter. This is referring to the lower base of the letter, meaning the horizontal line on the bottom. V'tchunato mitgadelet, saying his ability to act in the world grows. Chazaku habinyan hashomer et kol ha'omedim alav miyirida tehomit, which also provides a guard for all of the things standing to not fall into the abyss. So here, all these concepts are coming back to this pasuk that we opened up with. The tzaddik is in a perpetual state of being given oriented, which means that he's constantly thinking about everything on his side, everything that he's in relationship with, which allows him to collect all of the pratim, all of the specific points of light in which coalesce into an organic whole. That gives him the ability to give tzedakah, right? The tzaddik gives tzedakah, which in turn allows him to build a base, a foundation, a yesod, which everything stands upon. Someone who is a tzedakah machine, or an organization that's a tzedakah machine, a community that's a tzedakah machine, forms a yesod, forms a foundation. Everything is able to rest on this thing. It's a strong foundation. And it guards them, as Rav Kook says, it guards everyone from falling into the abyss. The foundation keeps things from falling into the abyss. Yirat Hashem Makor Chaim. The fear of God is the source of life. I'm not sure why he throws that in, to be honest. Laman Sur Misha'ol Mata. In order to avoid falling into the depths. Megadel Oz Shem Hashem, and it creates a strong like a lighthouse type building to declare the strength of God. Bo Yarutz Tzadik V'Nisgav, that the righteous will run to and be uplifted. Okay, a little bit of poetic language there at the end. I'm not exactly sure what that last line is adding on, but it certainly sounds very nice. So again, just coming back to these themes that we discussed before. This is really all coming to a summary in these last couple of lines. That tzaddik is constantly oriented to being the giver, and that allows him to coalesce all the different specificities into an organic, harmonized whole. That harmonized whole, then it becomes the tool for giving. That tool for giving forms the foundation for everyone, and everyone is able to lean on that foundation. Just to harp on this for just a second more, I wanted to read you a quote from the Sefer HaBahir. Sefer HaBahir is a book it's dated back to the time of Chazal, perhaps late Chazal, but it's a work that's very, very mystical in nature, and it gives very foundational insights into the, let's say, the precursors to what we would call Kabbalistic literature. So Tana, Omud Echad Min Haaretz L'Rakia. There is a pillar that stretches from the earth to the sky. V'tzadik shemo, and this pillar is called tzaddik. Al shem tzaddikim, just like righteous people. I'm not sure why it throws that in there. Al shem tzaddikim, obviously it's referring to tzaddikim. Uchsheyesh tzaddikim ba'olam mitgaber v'im lav mitchalesh. And what? So that's what it means. Al shem tzaddikim. It means that when there are tzaddikim in the world, this pillar is strong. When there aren't tzaddikim in the world, the pillar becomes weak. V'hu sovel kol ha'olam. This pillar keeps the entire world up. It sustains the entire world. Tichsiv, as it says in the pasuk in Mishlei, the pasuk that we read before, tzaddik yesod olam. The tzaddik is the foundations of the earth. V'im chalash lo yuchal yitkayim ha'olam. But if it's weakened, the world is not able to be sustained. Hilkach afilu ein ba'olam el tzaddik echad. Therefore, even if in the world there is only one righteous person, ma'amid ha'olam, he sustains the entire world. Shenemar v'tzadik yesod olam. Tzaddik is the foundations of all the earth. It is very, very important to contextualize what's being said. It's not saying some generic thing. If there's a tzaddik in the world who does daf yomi every day and davens nates and does tikkun chatzos and washes his lettuce really, really good, so in the merit of his actions, the world is sustained. That's also true. Obviously, our merits, they go far, they have ripple effects that are far, far beyond our 4 cubits. That's for sure true. But it's saying something much more specific, these verses. It's saying that tzaddik in a specific sense, that tzaddik who is oriented to being the Yesod Olam means something. What does that mean? It means that he's oriented to gathering all the pratim together in order to create a tool of hashpa'ah, a tool of giving. That's what it means. That tzaddik is the foundations of the earth, and that's what Yesod means. Where is the midah of Yesod alluded to? We have a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim that we say every day, or most people say every day, that it lists all of these midot, all of the attributes, or at least the 7 lower attributes, right? What's called the Zeir Anpin. L'cha Hashem ha'gedula, v'ha'gvura, v'ha'tiferet, v'ha'netzach, v'ha'hod. To you, unto God, are all these attributes. Ki chol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz. That the midah of Yesod isn't called Yesod in that pasuk. What is it called? Kol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz. The term, right, or the phrase "Kol b'shamayim va'aretz." That phrase is the attribute of Yesod.
So we influence the Shammai as well.
Sorry.
So we influence the Shammai as well.
Well, Shammai ba'aretz are the two primary categories of all of being. Right? Shammai ba'aretz. Yes. We influence Shammai itself. Also,
and by
that's correct.
Default, even Rishonim are protected by this Yesod.
Correct. Yes, even the Rishonim are corrected by this.
Why would they be swept away if they're protected by the Yesod?
Well, the person, a person's sustenance. I hear the question. A person's state in general is affected by their own actions and also the actions of other people. That's the nature of being alive, being a person. So a person doesn't have anything to their own.
They can't grip onto that.
Well, they could, and that's an interesting point. You reminded me of something I wanted to bring in here. They could, in theory, but it's not something they want to rely on. A person doesn't want to be in a state where they have nothing of themselves. They're so unstable that when the storm comes, they're swept away. And the only hope that they have is to cling on to the more grounded, anchored person or thing in order to be sustained. You don't want to get to that point. That's not a good thing. And the point you reminded me about is that in the Midrash Rabbah, in Parshas Noach, it brings this pasuk to describe who? Noach. He's the only person in the Torah that's described as a tzaddik. Noach ish tzaddik. Tamim haya b'dorosav. He's the tzaddik. Ka'avor sufa ein rasha. When the storm comes, there's no more wicked people. Which storm is that talking about? The Mabul. When the Mabul comes, it sweeps away all the wicked people. It's tzaddik, and there's one tzaddik who's the foundation of all of the earth, and that's Noach. Noach ish tzaddik. He's the foundation of all the earth. And you remind me about that. The Midrash says that there was one person who literally had to cling on, right? He literally had to cling on to the ark from the outside. That must have been a very uncomfortable ride. He had to hold on because he had nothing. He had to hold on to the ark, and he lasted with that. Yeah.
But why did he last? No one else lasted.
That's an interesting question. What Chazal are trying to say about this character? About, on the one hand, he didn't make it into the teva, but on the other hand, he was able to kind of cling to the teva and make it out. It's a good question. I don't have a good answer for what the symbolism of that is. But be that as it may, the point is that Noach is a very powerful embodiment of this, and it even at the pshat level, the idea of the storm and the idea of everything being swept away. That's literally what happened. It's literally what happened. There was a massive storm. Everything is swept away. Everyone dies. Everything's destroyed. And there's this one righteous person who's able to maintain continuity forever. Right? He becomes literally and figuratively the foundations of the earth. Yeah? And again, this is accomplished. It's not just a generic righteousness in air quotes of being good, so we somehow metaphysically influence the world to be good. Again, I'm not saying that's not true, because it is, but this is a more specific message, and the specific message is that through orienting ourselves as a yesod, as a foundation, as someone who brings things together in a harmonized fashion in order to be a mashpia, in order to be a giver, that is the tzaddik that it's talking about, and that tzaddik becomes the foundations of all the earth. Bezrat Hashem.